This is 3ABN Now with John and Rosemary Malkovich.
Hello and welcome to 3ABN Now. I'm sure today you will be very much informed about a subject that I know a lot of elderly people will want to know about. And I'm getting older, so I want to know about it also.
And young people too, in some cases.
In some cases, that's right. If they've been listening to that music that's very loud, it affects your hearing. So today we're very, very happy to have a man that you're probably familiar with because he's been on 3ABN before, and it's Graham Weir. He's a retired hearing rehabilitation specialist, and he's also a speaker at many churches about subjects that you would find interesting. So I'd like to welcome you, Graham, to the program today. You're in West Australia and we're in New South Wales, and it's good to have you come and share and be a blessing to people who have hearing issues that will need attention. So I'd like to think that as you go to church, you'll be able to enjoy more the services that are presented. So welcome, Graham.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here.
You've chosen a memory or a Bible verse, or a few, from Mark chapter 7, verses 31 to 37. So I'm going to read them and I'm going to ask you about them, but I think they'll be obvious. And again, departing from the coasts of Tyre and Sidon, he, Jesus, came in unto the Sea of Galilee, through the midst of the coasts of Decapolis. And they bring unto him one that was deaf, and had an impediment in his speech. And they beseech him to put his hand upon him. And he took him aside from the multitude, and put his fingers into his ears, and spit and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and saith unto him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And straightway his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain. And he charged them that they should tell no man. But the more he charged them, so much the more a great deal they published it, and were beyond measure astonished, saying, He hath done all things well. He maketh both the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak. What a great occasion that was, Graham.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's interesting because in those days, it was common for people to think that if a person suffered from deafness or blindness or was disabled in some way, it's because their parents or themselves must have been great sinners. But Jesus came to correct that perception.
That's right.
And the Spirit of Prophecy actually tells us, makes a very interesting comment about this. And I'll just read to you what Ellen White said. She says, I saw that it is in the providence of God that widows and orphans, the blind, the deaf, the lame, and persons afflicted in a variety of ways have been placed in close Christian relationship to his church. And she says it is to prove his people and develop their true character. Angels of God are watching to see how we treat these persons who need our sympathy, love, and disinterested benevolence. This is God's test of our character. If we have the true religion of the Bible, we shall feel that a debt of love, kindness, and interest is due to Christ in behalf of his brethren. And we can do no less than to show our gratitude for his immeasurable love to us, while we were sinners unworthy of his grace, by having a deep interest and unselfish love for those who are our brethren and who are less fortunate than ourselves. And that came from Testimonies for the Church, volume 3, and at page 511.
Amazing idea.
You know, Graham, I'm thinking back in those days, if you had a hearing impairment, it wouldn't have been very good because there wasn't really too much around to help. But as time has gone on and your work has been involved in means now where people who can't hear have the opportunity to actually hear to a degree and understand. So I'm glad that you're here because you also have a hearing impairment, and so I would like to hear the story behind Graham Weir and how it started and where it led to, and how come you're now in that position now to help other people.
Okay, well, I was born in Williamsburg, New South Wales, and I grew up in Gympie where my dad was a barber. And when I was 8 years old, I suffered a bout of meningitis. And I can really remember this event because I was very sick. I think I must have been near death. And I woke up one morning and I called out to my mother, and I couldn't hear any sound come out of my throat. And I thought I must have lost my voice. But then my mother walked in the door of the bedroom and started to speak and move her mouth, and I still couldn't hear anything. And I realized at that point in time I had lost my hearing. And I don't remember much what happened after that, but I do remember one incident. They sent me back to school. I had no hearing aids for about 3 or 4 months. They sent me back to a normal hearing school, and I was standing underneath the school next to a post underneath the building during the lunch break. And I got this vague sense of dread. And I think the Holy Spirit was looking after me even then. Something made me turn my head slightly to the side just in time to see a boy's fist heading for my face. Obviously some boy had tried to talk to me and I didn't respond, so he thought he'd knock some sense into me. So just in time I ducked, and this boy missed my face by a couple of centimetres and slammed his fist into a concrete post.
Oh, no.
I tell you what, I actually heard him scream. Well, he disappeared for about 3 or 4 months. No one saw him. The ambulance came and took him away. And when this boy came back, he had a metal sling on his arm from his elbow to his fingertips with rubber bands on each finger. And I want to tell you, that guy was a good friend of mine from thereafter, and no one else took a pot shot at me.
So obviously you wouldn't have been able to stay at that school, correct?
Yes.
So what did you do?
For a little while, not long. I did stay there for a while because they eventually took me down to Brisbane and fitted me with a hearing aid. You know, an old box device with a cord and a button in the ear. And of course, my right ear was completely dead. So I couldn't hear anything out of that ear. The left ear, there was very little hearing left. And the box aid, of course, picked up every noise and clunk in the place. And I can remember they fitted me with that hearing aid in Brisbane. And that day I walked out of the door after being totally deaf for several months, not hearing a single sound, just as a tram went past the front door of the building. You can imagine the racket. I couldn't believe that I'd missed that hearing for so long. It changed my life. It wrecked my education. I had to drop out of school at the age of 14 because I couldn't handle multiple teachers. And so I became a barber with my dad, who ran the barber shop. And in the barber shop, you know, that's where I learned to lip read. Because I could watch people in the mirror while I'm cutting their hair. And some wise guy said to me one day, "Oh," he says, "does that mean you can lip read backwards?"
That's a good question.
I said yes. But anyway, I dropped out of school for many years. And I dropped out of school at age 14, actually, and I didn't try to get back into school until I was in my mid-20s, when I decided I got sick of factory work. I left Gympie and I gone to Brisbane, worked in factories for many years, got beaten up in a factory one day because I couldn't hear. And I thought, I can't keep on living my life like this. I've got to go and get a better education. And so I managed to enroll in adult education and then become a university student studying psychology. And while I was studying psychology, I had a very interesting conversion experience because I knew nothing about the Seventh-day Adventist message. And here I was at university. I believed I was an atheist. And the university lecturer asked the class to write a paper expressing their frame of reference for counselling, because I was studying counselling psychology. And what do? I wrote 36 pages condemning Christianity. I'm a lecturer. My lecturer gave me top marks for that. And he said to me, this is very well expressed, it's a very good piece of written work. But then he challenged me. And he said, look, you've said all these things about Christianity in general. He said, what you've said about them in general is correct. He said, much of Christianity is hypocritical. But he said, I want to challenge you, because if you think about it, all these different churches out there claim to believe in Jesus Christ. But if you examine their teachings, you discover they teach different things. So how do you find out if they're telling the truth or if it's not the truth, or what's right and what's wrong? He says, there's only one way to find out. He said, you have to do research. And he said, I'd like to help you do your research. I'd like to give you a commentary on Christian history. And so he gave me a book by this woman called Ellen White, and the name of the book is The Great Controversy. You can imagine the rest of the story. Well, I finished that book after several months. I had to finish it because it was required reading. And from that book, I was so fascinated with that book, he gave me some more books. And then I read Patriarchs and Prophets. And you know, Patriarchs and Prophets gave me a clear understanding of the Bible than anything else I'd read. Because if you read the Bible and you're not familiar with it, the stories aren't in chronological order. And so when I read Patriarchs and Prophets, the whole thing fitted together in a sequence, like a storyline. And then I began to understand the history of Christianity. And of course, I went from Patriarchs and Prophets to Desire of Ages and learned about Christ. And then I read Acts of the Apostles. And then I read The Great Controversy again. By the end of that, I realized I had to make a decision, or I would be a hypocrite, like all the Christians I've written about. So I made a decision to be baptized as a Seventh-day Adventist. And I've been a member of the church ever since. That was back in 1976. God is good. He's still helping me.
That's a number of years, Graham. And I'm sure that looking back, I think you wouldn't do anything different. Would that be right?
That's right.
Oh, there is one thing he wouldn't do, that he would do different. He wouldn't catch meningitis.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe the Lord allowed me to become as deaf as I am for a reason. He could have allowed me to become totally deaf to the point where I had to use sign language. But he didn't do that. He allowed me to become deaf enough to sit on the fence between the deaf world and the hearing world. Not deaf enough to be thrust into the totally deaf world, and certainly deaf enough to stop my participation in the hearing world easily. So it was a struggle, but the Lord is blessed all the way through. I could tell you lots of stories.
You know, Graham, I'm thinking also, when I look at you and your story, I think of, well, everyone can say, yes, I know what it's like to be deaf, but you don't until you experience it. So God put you in that position because you can fit both categories. And so you can understand what it is when you have a hearing impairment. And so you can be sympathetic to someone who is going through the same thing. And I think it's very good because, you know, we can talk about things, but unless we've experienced them, we really don't understand fully what's involved. So I'm not glad that you had this come upon you, but because of what happened, I'm glad that you're using that to help others to find a means to live a life that's reasonably normal under the circumstances.
Yes, I got sick of, I felt for years I had a chip on my shoulder. And I would say, Lord, why me, you know? Why did this happen to me? Until one day I realized the Lord could lift his little finger to change my deafness, to cure it. But he chose not to, for some reason. Therefore, I thought, well, okay, Lord, if I have to be like this for the rest of my life, use it. Use me. Help me to reach people. Help me to do a work I could not have possibly done otherwise. And the Lord has blessed me beyond measure. I'm still doing that.
That's a terrific testimony.
And not only that, Graham, but as you read from what Ellen White said, it also helps us with our character development to make our character more fit for heaven than for this world through your own and knowing what the struggles are for people. And then other people who have known you and worked with you to have compassion for people who do struggle with their hearing, who do have some other kind of impairment or impediment. And so that working on our characters is so vitally important. It can make some bad things worthwhile.
Absolutely. I never forget an experience I had in the United States, in Washington, D.C., where I was doing my master's degree in counselling rehabilitation for the deaf and hard of hearing. I belonged to a deaf group who used to go to the Seventh Adventist church there, a group of deaf Adventists. And one day I went to this church, and of course in this church, no one speaks, they're all using sign language. On this particular day in the church, they had a hearing person, a pastor, giving the talk in spoken English. And next to him was a sign language interpreter, changing it into sign language for the deaf in the audience. And next to me was a girl from Gallaudet who was totally deaf and totally blind from birth. And I thought, how are they going to get this message through to this girl? And another deaf girl was sitting next to her, and she was translating the sign language into deaf-blind language on the hand. As fast as this guy could speak, she was translating on this girl's hand what he was saying. And I thought to myself, wow, this is a modern-day Helen Keller. And I thought to myself, if the Lord can do something like that, He has a way to reach people who are totally deaf, totally blind, whatever their disability. And if He can do that for them, He can use me.
Amen.
Yeah.
What an amazing story.
So tell me, Graham, what did you do? How did you further your career through studies? Just walk us through that.
Well, I did a master's degree in counselling at Gallaudet after I left Queensland University. I won a scholarship from Rotary International, Quaker International, a couple of other places. I spent 2 years in the US doing my master's degree with a special focus on the deaf and the hard of hearing. I came back to Australia and I worked for deaf societies for a few years and then changed careers and went into audiology. Worked for audiology clinics for a few years and eventually starting my own private practice in Benja and Rockingham in Western Australia. And Diane and I were there until we retired from that business. We sold it 2016. And then we came to 3ABN and we did that recording in 2017.
Very
Excellent.
good.
So let me ask you, Graham, there's a lot of things you want to share for particularly those people who have hearing loss and church life, because that's another interest you have. You want to help churches to enable people to hear and understand programs instead of sitting there and just sitting there for the whole time. Is that right?
Yep.
And one of the problems is that deaf people just can't listen in church. They can't hear the sermon. They can't join in. And so it's a matter of why even go? So what is the solution? That's what we're going to talk about.
Well, the solution for hard of hearing people is assistive listening technology. Because hearing aids in churches, in any group situation where there's a lot of background noise, hearing aids are not insufficient to hear clearly. The problem is not loudness, it's clarity.
Yes.
And as you know yourself, if you're using microphones and you're trying to do a recording, if you try to record somebody speaking with the microphone halfway across the room, sound quality of that's going to be terrible. If you put the microphone on the person like you're wearing yourself now, the sound quality is much, much better. Well, a hearing aid works like a microphone across the room. It picks up a lot of background noise. Assistive listening technology bridges that gap electronically. So you have a system where everything that comes through the PA system, through the audio, can be broadcast out to a phone or another device which will link automatically with hearing aids via Bluetooth wireless. And the sound quality is vastly better than they would get with a hearing aid alone, with much less background noise.
Well, just take us through what is the extent of deafness in the world, Graham?
The extent of deafness in the world, you've got 466 million in the whole world. That's according to the World Health Organization. In Australia, that translates to about 3.6 million people.
That's a lot of people.
That's 5.7% of the world population, roughly.
How much?
5.7%.
That's still a lot of people.
Yes, it's a lot.
And so, you know, that's obviously increasing each year. So any one of us sitting or anyone out there watching may experience that problem as they get older.
Yes, exactly. In fact, they expect it will go up to about 900 million people by the year 2050. So it's a big increasing problem. In fact, it's the biggest disability group in the world.
And it can affect, even as you're in your own situation, it can affect younger people through accident or through illness, through even too much loud music or other noise in industry. There's a lot of reasons for deafness, isn't there? Not just birth.
That's right, and it can be very debilitating on social life, on communication with friends, with relationships and things like that. It can be devastating.
Yes.
I've seen it destroy relationships.
So it'd affect your mental health as well, is that correct?
Absolutely, it does. Because if you can't hear clearly, and you have to compensate in some way, and some people compensate by talking all the time, so you can't get a word in edgewise over the top of them. They bluff their way through, and that really creates social conflict. People don't want to talk to someone when they can't get a word in edgewise. People who don't listen and respond appropriately. And as a result of that, it can cause a deterioration in personal relationships, especially marriage relationships. If a spouse is trying to communicate with a hearing impaired husband or wife and they don't respond appropriately, you eventually stop talking to people on a meaningful level and you revert to just perfunctory or superficial kind of conversation. You cannot maintain a relationship if you only talk on a superficial or information sharing level most of the time. Relationships thrive on meaningful communication.
Yeah.
To have meaningful communication, you have to have appropriate listening and responding skills. We've got to have non-verbal skills. We nod our heads. We say, okay, I understand. I see what you're saying, that kind of thing. If we can't do that over a period of time, if a relationship is constantly superficial or just information sharing, the relationship can break down, especially in a marriage. And you can find yourself with divorce. I've seen that happen to many of my patients, actually. They've come in very agitated. One of the partners is angry because the other one has a hearing loss and hasn't or won't do anything about it because they say, I'm okay, I can manage all right, when it's obviously not managing all right. They might think they manage okay, but the spouse is not managing okay. They don't acknowledge that. They don't accept responsibility for it. My job in audiology and counselling is to help the patient realise that they need to make themselves as user-friendly as possible with the hearing loss. You know, because hard of hearing people and deaf people can be very user-unfriendly because of the manner of communication or failure to communicate properly. So a lot of the work involves not just technology, giving somebody a hearing aid, giving them assistive listening systems in church, but helping them to communicate appropriately even when they're not sure exactly what people have said.
You know, there was a story I saw one time, and there was a husband and wife. They were both deaf and they were signing with each other, but they had children, young children. And because they couldn't speak to the children when they were babies, they started teaching them how to sign. And when those children were only 12 months, 18 months old, they could sign back to their parents. And in that way, they were able to communicate with their parents at a younger age than a child does with vocalisation. And so the parents found that their children were a lot happier and didn't have tantrums and misunderstandings because they could actually communicate with their parents in a meaningful way. Even though the children spoke and could hear, they used signing as a way of communicating from a very young age. It was really, really good. Now we've got a B-roll, we've got a video clip that we want to show that's to do with listening and hearing loss. So let's have a look at that now, Graham, and then you can comment on it, okay?
Introducing Listen Everywhere, a simple and inexpensive tool for your church to provide a better sound for the hard of hearing.
It's invaluable. You can hear all the different expressions, even the quiet ones. I'd highly recommend it.
Through its free iPhone and Android app, Listen Everywhere enables greater church participation with reduced background noise and improved audio clarity.
Often we underestimate the number of people who would actually benefit from having this device in the church. So I know that I've met quite a number of people who are just overjoyed because all of a sudden, after a number of years, they can actually participate because they can hear the program itself.
We've met a number of people in the bigger churches, and I've asked them, casually, hey, why don't you attend church? I can't hear it. And I thought, well, this needs to be in every church.
Upgrade your audio experience today with Listen Everywhere.
So Graham, take us through this system, through the problems that people have had in the churches and the innovative things that are now coming along so that people can actually participate in church life and hear what is going on.
Okay, well, there's been some technology around for years, which we call assistive listening systems. One of them is the audio loop system, which is a coil of wire that runs around the church or underneath certain seats, and hearing aids that are fitted with what we call telecoils or telephone switches could pick up the signal just by pressing a button. But what we find nowadays with the latest hearing technology, the latest hearing aids, is they're not using the telecoil much anymore, and the manufacturers are installing Bluetooth wireless technology for the simple reason they want to be able to communicate with a smartphone, for example, wirelessly without any additional accessories. So now, using that technology, this Bluetooth technology, this device called Listen Everywhere, which is now called Listen Wi-Fi, you put a box at the server up at the sound desk. That connects to a router which transmits the sound around the church, broadcasts it around on a local area network. Any smartphone can download an app on the phone called Listen Everywhere, now called Listen Wi-Fi. Click on that app and it will link to the hearing aids automatically. So the audio coming through the church system goes into the phones and into the hearing aids automatically via Bluetooth. Most hearing aids today have that technology. The audio loop, while it's still there, while the telecoil is still in some more powerful hearing aids, we find that it's nowhere near as efficient as Bluetooth. The old audio loop systems had a lot of interference with it. Bluetooth has almost no interference at all. There's some other technical issues like you get with every technology. Once you sort those out, it works very well in churches. We've installed it in a number of churches, particularly over on the East Coast where you are. Coley Schofield at Christian Services for the Blind and Hearing Impaired, and Wayne Baum have installed it in a number of churches. And at the Grey Nomads camp where we saw that video clip was taken, they use it there. And it makes a huge difference for people who have the right kind of hearing aids, but most of the hearing aids today have that. Having that in mind, we need to remember that if someone has a mild or even a moderate hearing loss, they don't necessarily need any kind of technology apart from the hearing aid. Usually the hearing aid is okay in a church situation where they can pick up the PA system, the hearing aid is okay. But when you get into a profound or severe to profound hearing loss, then the hearing aid is not enough. That's when you need the assistive listening system. So every church should put this in, I believe. And you can get these systems now from Christian Services for the Blind and Hearing Impaired. You can get it with a subsidy. So that the Media Centre in Virunga will offer a subsidy to churches to install it. And some of our conferences are offering a matching subsidy. So the price of these devices in the Listen Everywhere system retails for around about $2,000 or less. And the subsidies will bring that price down to around about $1,000.
That's a question I was going to ask you, Graham, because I know that there's some little churches out there, and even the church that we attend, there's a lady there that has a hearing impairment. And so for us to buy something like that, it is a costly exercise. But if there are subsidies around, and I'm sure that if you want to, we're going to have an address roll in a little while, you can be able to contact Graham, take down the details, and he can help and guide you to maybe get something at a cheaper rate.
Yeah, they'll be able to contact the services for the blind and hearing impaired. Yeah, that's a really good system that they have. How long has that been out, Graham?
It's been around for a couple of years now.
Oh, very, very good. I think it'd be very helpful in the churches where they've started putting it in. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, and that was the difference between loudness and clarity of the sound, because I think that's an important concept for people to understand. So you don't go up to a deaf person and start shouting to make it loud so they can hear you, do you?
Yes. Yeah, it's a common thought that if someone gets a hearing aid and they're not hearing you, all you've got to do is increase the volume by shouting.
Yes.
But that has a lot of negative connotations because the people think you're getting aggressive and they feel bad, and all sorts of psychological problems occur as a result of that. The problem is not loudness. The problem is the hearing aids can pick up a lot of background noise. And especially if a person not looking at them, and they're partly dependent on facial expressions and lip reading, they can misconstrue what you're saying. The problem is the hearing aid microphone is like a microphone, like you're trying to record this program with a microphone on a podium in the middle of a room. It picks up a lot of background noise and it echoes. The sound quality is not very good. If you put a lapel microphone on like you're wearing now, the sound quality is much clearer. It's sharper. There's no background noise. Listen Everywhere does that with what a hearing aid is listening to. It switches from the hearing aid microphone to the audio microphones that are in the church. Any music or whatever's playing, someone speaking, it transmits out through the audio system so you get a much clearer signal coming into the hearing aid. It makes a big difference to your ability to participate.
So it's not making it louder, it's making it clearer.
That's
the
right.
clarity is better so the people can hear what is being said or sung or whatever.
That's right, because in my own experience, sometimes if there's a lot of background noise around me, I can solve that to a degree by turning the hearing aid volume down.
Yes, yes.
Just enough to kill the background noise and I can hear the speech better.
Very good.
So Graham, with this new technology, with your hearing impairment, what has it been like for you when you attend functions and at church and you listen to things? What has it actually done for you? Because I know there'll be a lot of people out there saying, well, what is it really like? And you are experiencing it. Could you share with us how it's impacted your religious experience, your relationship at church?
Yes, it's massive. Without this system or some system like that, I may as well stay home because I can't understand anything in the sermon. I can't understand what anybody else is saying in the church. It's a total waste of time. I go to sleep. And I know there's many people like me who can't hear in church, so they fall asleep or they just don't bother going. With these technologies, it means a difference between participation in church life and total exclusion.
That's right. My own mother is quite deaf, and you know her and you know her situation. And so for her to go to church, it's basically, why go? It's a waste of time because all you do is sit there and sit in your own noise. You know, you can't really hear what is being said. And so it makes it very hard for deaf people. And I think that people like me who can hear don't understand how difficult it is for people who can't hear when going to church or even going into a supermarket or a shopping centre. It must be very difficult with, like you say, with the hearing aids, it picks up all that sound around. But if you don't have hearing aids, you can't participate in conversations anyway.
So,
right.
That isolates you.
Graham, could you explain to us and to the viewers about the Christian services for the blind
And hearing impaired.
and hearing impairment? What is it, and what is its function?
Okay, this Christian Services for the Blind and Hearing Impaired is a Department of Adventist Media in Sydney, Australian Adventist Media. In America, it's put under the Ministry of Adventist Possibility Ministry. And they have 7 different areas of ministry, one of which is the deaf and hard of hearing. Christian Services for the Blind and Hearing Impaired has been around for quite a number of years. I've focused on audio books for the blind, and braille for the blind, and that sort of thing, but unfortunately the name gets people mixed up. They mix up the deafness with the blindness. In fact, I never forget an experience I had at Barunga Church one day after I gave a talk there. A lady came out afterwards and she was totally confused. She didn't talk to me. She talked to my wife. And she asked, "Oh, does he use braille?" She asked my wife if I use braille. I had a bit of a laugh. But you see, this is how people get this stuff mixed up. They don't equate hearing loss with something totally different from blindness or vision loss. So it's an unfortunate mixture. I'm sure they do that. They put it together for funding reasons because they want to get funding they want to fund a department that will reach both groups. But the needs of a deaf and a hard of hearing are totally different from the needs of a blind. There's no similarity. But anyway, they do a great job in what they do. With limited funding, they need more funding. They need more donations to help them give more devotion, more focus on the needs of a deaf and the hard of hearing, and even that 2 separate groups. The hard of hearing don't have a lot to do with the deaf, and the deaf don't have a lot to do with the hard of hearing. They're different, as we'll explain, I think, a little later on in the program.
What are some of the strategies that people who can hear should use when dealing with people who are having trouble hearing?
Okay, well, we have 5 points I think is worthwhile looking at, and if we can put that slide up, we can see it. First one is always try to face the hard of hearing person while speaking. When you lose your hearing, you can't communicate with each other with your back turned anymore.
Yes.
You've got to face one another and communicate. You can't talk from another room. It doesn't work. Plenty of people do that, and I realise I've got to change that rule. The other one is keep your hands and objects away from your face while speaking. None of this business. Put your hands in front of your face. Keep your hands away from your face while you're speaking. And avoid talking out of sight from another room. We just mentioned that one. Avoid appearing aggressive and impatient by shouting or looking aggressive because the person didn't understand you the first time. Don't shout. Just say it again quietly. And men, keep your beard trimmed so that your lips are fully visible.
Oh.
It's amazing how much communication, how many words are lost just by a moustache that covers the corners of the lips or obscures the lips completely. Honestly, it's like trying to understand someone who's talking to you from another room. You just don't get it. So keep the lips visible if you've got a moustache so people can read your lips easily.
That is so interesting. I've never thought of that before. And I'm sure most other people haven't either. Yes, I've got a few people I can tell that to. So let's go on to some other things to do with hearing loss. There's some more slides that you have. So let's go to the next one.
Okay. We need to understand that the needs of people with partial hearing loss are entirely different from the needs of people who are profoundly deaf and prefer to communicate with sign language.
All right.
And very different because often the deaf and the hard of hearing are lumped together. Their needs are entirely different. In fact, you can say people with total deafness can be categorized into two groups. One of them is sign language users, and the other one is oral deaf, what we call oral deaf or lip readers. These oral deaf people may not be fluent with sign language and prefer not to socialize with signers. It's part of the educational background that people have had. There's a group of people around who try to educate the deaf without signs. In fact, it goes all the way back to Alexander Graham Bell. Okay, Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, he had a deaf wife, and he used sign language to communicate with his deaf wife. He was trying to invent a telephone, trying to invent a hearing aid. He accidentally invented a telephone. And of course, deaf people and hard of hearing people have suffered ever since. But we're getting better. We're using video phones these days, and it's much better. Anyway, Bell was a contemporary of Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin, with his theory of evolution, tried to convince Bell that they had to do something to stop these deaf people congregating together and using sign language. Because he felt if they did, if they married together, it would generate a race of deaf people. And of course, he didn't understand genetics very well as we do it today. Well, that's not true.
No.
But in the process, he convinced Bell and a number of other high-powered politicians to convince the government to close down the schools for the deaf where sign language was being used. They succeeded in closing down all the schools for the deaf in the United States and then around the world, including Australia, and replacing those teachers, those deaf teachers who were using sign language to communicate with these deaf kids. They convinced them that to do that was unnatural and that deaf people should be able to learn to speak and hear like normal hearing people. So they brought in this idea of oralism, oral education for the deaf. The Alexander Graham Bell Association for the Deaf teaches oralism. They do not believe in sign language. And I encountered this when I was in Washington, D.C. We went down to their association, their head office in Washington, D.C., because I wanted to do some research on it. When we got there, the guy on the other side of the counter was profoundly deaf. And so naturally we started signing to him, and he couldn't understand us. He said, no, don't use sign language. We can hear. We lip read. Just speak. Well, we tried that, and it didn't work. We tried that several times, and it didn't work. So he ended up signing. In the end, we gave up and walked out. It's obviously ridiculous. Some people who do the oral education program for the deaf, yes, some of them do end up able to communicate with a few words, but a few of them are really successful at it. But in general, what it does, it deprives deaf people of a healthy communication diet.
Yes.
If you look at the deaf community where sign language is used, in fact, the philosophy of Gallaudet was total communication for the deaf. You use every method you can to communicate with deaf people, whether it's sign language, lip reading, oralism, cute speech, whatever you've got, to maximize their communication diet so they can have a normal social life together. And you find in the deaf community where the sign language is used fluently, there's a good social strategy, there's a good social relationship, good family relationship. If you look at the hard of hearing, on the other hand, where hearing loss keeps them out of the hearing world, which they belong to, they can't and don't want to use sign language. They can suffer much more from a poor communication diet. They're not getting third-level communication on a regular basis at length. They tend to find most of their communication is superficial or just information sharing. So relationships suffer, mental health suffer. So the hard of hearing are much more disadvantaged than the deaf in that respect. If the deaf community use sign language, they can have good socialization. Yes, the deaf community are shut out of church services much more. They need sign language interpreters. Technology doesn't help them. On the other hand, with the hard of hearing, sign language doesn't generally help the hard of hearing. Technology does. So you've got two separate groups there.
That's true.
In fact, if you look at wanting to start a ministry for the deaf in a church, for example, there's a couple of points to go through, and I think James has a slide there we can put up. Number one, it says provide qualified sign language interpreters at churches in areas with high concentrations of deaf signers. And in Australia, funds for interpreters in churches are available. Christian Services for the Blind and Hearing Impaired at the Adventist Media Centre will provide funds to make that available. So that's a really good thing. The second thing is raise funds to train and employ a Bible worker with fluent signing skills to work in selected areas near churches with interpreted services. We need more people with good hearing who can train to become Auslan interpreters and then work in churches as volunteer sign language interpreters. The third thing is we should aim to establish a dedicated services for the deaf as an annex to a supportive church. Because deaf people are like any other language group. If they use sign language, they like to mix together using their own language. So if you've got a deaf church, a dedicated service for the deaf as an annex to a supportive church, then you can have a deaf pastor, or you can create a scholarship fund to train and employ a person who's fluent in sign language, and preferably a deaf couple, as a pastor for the deaf. Another point is you should add closed captions to as many current videos as possible, and make it a policy that all videos produced by the church must include closed captions, and where possible, the sign language interpreter. You can have the interpreter down in one corner, as you'll find on some videos on YouTube. There's a lot more I could tell you, but I guess we're running out of time. So maybe if people want to contact me or Christian Services for the Blind and Hearing Impaired in Burunga, if you put up that slide with the contact details, that would be very helpful. And I think we might go from there. How do you feel?
Before we do that, Graham, before we put the address roll up, and I want you folk to get a piece of paper and pencil. Graham, I have a question to ask you. It's new technology, 1 or 2 years. How's it progressing in Australia? And then secondly, how's it progressing over in the General Conference in terms of this equipment being made available to Adventist churches?
Well, Christian Services for the Blind and Hearing Impaired are promoting this Australia-wide. They're offering it on loan, offering units on loan to churches. That they were doing that. So the churches could trial the system, and then, if necessary, they could purchase it. I'm not sure if that situation has changed. You probably need to talk to them about that. So that's happening in Australia. At the General Conference level, because I'm on a committee, I'm a member of the task force for the deaf and hard of hearing within Adventist Possibility Ministries at the General Conference. And I do know recently we had a Zoom meeting and we agreed that they would promote Listen Everywhere and install it in the main auditorium at the General Conference session in July 2025. They would also have the products on display, and there's not just Listen Everywhere, there's a couple of other products as well. They will have them on display and for demonstration in the Adventist Possibility Ministries exhibition booth in the exhibit hall. So, and then they're going to promote this to our churches around the globe. That's the next step.
So that's a good way for people to learn about it, and I'm glad that you said that people can loan one and experience it in their church. But I also want to add, Graham, there's another means too, which I mentioned to you earlier on before the program, and that is a lady at our church. You can download an app on your phone that translates while the preacher is speaking or anyone is speaking, and they can read it. And I've been very impressed how well it is. I've watched it, I've seen it operate. So there's another means for you to understand what the preacher is saying.
And we also use that device, the lady's phone, with this app on it to be able to communicate with her, because we talk to her, close to her, and with the phone nearby or even into the phone itself, and it types up what we're saying. So she just quickly reads it. Ah, yes, okay, now I've got the understanding. Because she is quite deaf, and you have to be very close to her ear to be able to speak to her, and even then sometimes she doesn't understand. So this app has been a real game changer for her, because she can get to understand what is being said. And they actually hook a little line onto because she sits at the front of the church, and they have a cable that they hook onto the microphone cable, and then it has a speaker in it, and then it writes out for her on the screen on her phone what the speaker is saying, so she can actually read the sermon as the person is saying it.
Yeah.
So it's been extremely helpful for someone who is so profoundly deaf.
Yes.
She's not deaf, she's hearing impaired, but very hearing impaired.
That's a great app, and technology is going ahead so fast we can't keep up with it. I've tried some of those apps and they haven't worked very well for me. But I'm sure the audience would like to know what that app is and where you get it from. I do know the latest technology with that is in a pair of glasses. You can get a pair of glasses now. They can have clear lenses or you can have prescription lenses, where the special microphones in the glasses will pick up a person's voice, change it into subtitles, and project those subtitles in space next to the head of the person who's speaking to you. The person who's speaking can't see that, but the person who has the glasses can see it. And in real time, it subtitles what that person is saying, and it translates it into multiple languages as you select it on the glasses. This is the way technology is going. It's absolutely marvellous.
Well, I'm thinking the same thing, Graham. And, you know, if there are people who have these problems, I think technology is going to find solutions that we haven't even thought about. Maybe they've already been invented and they're yet to be released. But that one of the glasses is very interesting. And
especially with different languages. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what we're going to do, Graham, we're talking with Graham Weir. He's a retired hearing rehabilitation specialist. He's been telling us about his life and how he experienced partial loss of hearing. Well, he's got more than partial loss of hearing, but he's here and he's been telling us what you can do when you attend church, what you can do if you're talking with people. All you need is the ability to have a smartphone and the attachment of a device that will connect in the church, and you too can hear and your life can be changed.
Within the church.
Within the church. So Graham, we're just going to take a break here, and if you want to write down these details and find out more, then this is where you can do so.
To learn more about assistive listening systems for your church, you can contact Graham Weir via email. His address is gmw@westnet.com.au. Call Christian Services for the blind and hearing impaired on 02 9847 2296. That's 02 9847 2296. Or visit their website by pointing your web browser to csfbhi.adventistchurch.com. That's csfbhi.adventistchurch.com.
I hope you wrote those details down, because I'm sure there are many people who are wanting to listen to church services, but they don't go because they can't hear, or if they do go, it doesn't do them very much good. And so, Graham, there are so many technologies that have happened since you had your hearing loss at 8 years of age. And you've been through an amazing amount of technological change in the way of hearing loss and deafness. What has it done for you spiritually? And what is do you think is the greatest achievement? I've got those two questions for you.
Okay, well, for me spiritually, I guess one big realization hit me when I was in the United States and I encountered this girl who was profoundly deaf from birth, and she was totally blind from birth. And when I saw how the Lord opened ways for her to communicate and participate in the church service, I thought, if God can use someone like that, He can do so with me. I often thought to myself, why me, Lord? And then I thought, well, if the Lord can do that with somebody like that, there's a place for me in this life. And I believe that if we put our disabilities, the problems we have in life, instead of looking at ourselves, we look at the Lord who allowed this thing to happen. And we say, Lord, I don't know why this has happened to me, But I believe that you can use it. If I put this in your hands, you are well capable of using it. Because you can make a donkey speak, for example. If you can make a donkey speak, you can use a deaf man or a hard of hearing man to spread your messages. And the Lord's given me opportunity in doing that to preach around Australia on the Reformation series, which we did on 3ABN a few years back, and many other topics as well. I find now, instead of sitting in a church somewhere that doesn't have technology, where I can't hear what is said and go to sleep, I can now speak. Because if I'm speaking, I'm not going to go to sleep while I'm speaking. So, in preaching, the Lord has given me a message, the 300 messages of Revelation 14, 6 to 12. These messages, I believe, God's last warning messages for the world. Look, we look at it this way. The Lord is coming back soon. And the best technology you've ever seen or heard is about to happen.
That's it.
All these problems we have here is going to pass away. Our Lord is coming. We need to get ready and use what we have or haven't got. We put that in his service, and I believe the Lord will bless it, and we will hear him say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord." Amen. What do you say?
What a wonderful benediction that is.
Yes. And I like the comment that you made. Our Jesus is coming very soon. We won't need any of these devices that we call that are so important, because he's going to remake us anew. You will have 100% hearing, you will have 100% vision, and you will have 100% life in the fullest, because that life is forever with Jesus and God throughout eternity. It's a wonderful thought. But you know, in the meantime, Graham, we want to thank you for sharing this information with us, that you can do something about it right now. You can go and get a device and start attending church and experiencing what maybe as a young person you enjoyed, but as you got older, you've lost that ability. So I want to encourage you, if you didn't get those details, you can contact 3ABN Australia and we could pass it on. But otherwise, go to the Christian Services for the Blind here in Australia, and follow up and ask the question, can we have this device on trial, just to see how it works, and I'm sure they will be able to help you. I want to thank you that you're faithful. I want to thank you for your support of 3ABN, and God bless you until next time.